On the bench today we have a pair, as you can see. They're Pace SideTalk 1000B model radios. So if you look at the faceplate there, you can see exact same model number. And from the front, they look exactly the same, with one exception. Different channel dials. The bottom one is a 23-channel radio. The top one is a 40-channel radio. And they are, without a doubt, completely different radios. I mean, the exterior may look the same with the difference of 23 numbers on the dial and 40, but inside, yeah, completely different radios. And even this 23-channel radio is not the same as the 23-channel radio in the service manuals. And I don't mean just the Sam's manual. I've got the Pace service manual underneath of that, and that radio is not like what's in those manuals. So, yeah, nightmare radios. And to make matters worse, so now the service manuals for this 23-channel radio, they're close enough where... Turn the squelch up a little more. The service manual is close enough for aligning the 23-channel radio with some modifications. You still have to, it's time consuming because you have to sit there and figure out, you're adjusting trimmer because these are sideband radios. It's a SideTalk, so it's a, yes, it is an AM sideband radio. But yeah, all of the frequency adjustments, they're all different. The trimmer capacitor, they tell you in there to adjust for, if you're on channel 1, lower sideband, is different than what's in this radio. You flip the channel 2, 3, 4, what is it then? 8, 12, 16, 20, and 23 are the channels you actually put the radio on when you're doing the adjustments. Yeah, they're all different. There's transformer coupling, tunable transformers that are missing. There's other ones that have been relocated. There's trimmer capacitors added where they're supposed to be. Yeah, it's just, you kind of got to wing it. Let me just turn that down. What really sucks is the 40-channel radio, and this is where if somebody has or knows where one is, there is absolutely no service manual that I can find for that one. Yeah, you're just out of luck. And like I say, what really sucks there is it's completely different. This one's crystal synthesized. That one has a PLL synthesized radio. So yeah, huge difference. And I usually don't stack radios, but it's not like I'm stacking it on the cover. It's because I've got the covers off of both of these, so it's just setting on the interior chassis, top to bottom. But I wanted to show this top one. For starters, when you look in these radios, they're much like, I guess, like SBEs. When you open a lot of the SBE radios, the base station radios, they're upside down. You take the top cover off, you're looking at copper traces. You're looking at the bottom of the circuit board. Where most base stations, when you take the covers off, the parts are facing up. That's the first thing you'll notice. Change difference between most other radios. Now, another thing that really absolutely sucks on these radios, the bottom one I haven't done anything at all to this top radio. The bottom radio is done with the exception of cleaning it. But both of these radios, one thing that really, really sucks on these is they're early. And there's nothing wrong with that. We like old radios. But the big problem is these are double-sided circuit boards, but they do not have through-plated holes. And the board material's kind of so it expands and contracts. It's not a good high-quality FR4, fiberglass board, so it can expand and contract. And what they used on these back in the day was from the other side of the board, the component side. Basically, you can think of it as a teeny tiny nail, is what it looks like. It's just a piece of copper wire with the head smashed, with an end smashed flat, basically. But they'd place that through the board on the top side, through to the bottom, and then it gets soldered. And then that solders the copper trace on the other side of the board and attaches it, and then it's soldered on this side of the board, that attaches it to the trace on this side of the board. The problem is with expansion and contraction, and unfortunately they almost never, ever, ever break out on the bottom side, where you could just take the cover off, look the radio, look the circuit board over, go, there's a broken solder joint and fix it. Nah, it almost never fails on the easy to get to side. It always fails on the component side, where that flat head is basically. It'll pop loose. The problem is trying to find those pass-throughs on the other side. A lot of times they'll be underneath of components. They'll be underneath of electrolytic capacitors or ICs, buried under relays, or they can honestly just be an absolute nightmare to try to repair. And it's not just a pace thing. SBE's had those problems. Johnson's, I have all but ripped out all the hair out of my head at times working on Johnson radios, Johnson, Viking Messenger, that company. I have all but pulled my hair out working on some of those radios. And the same thing with the SBE radios. When those pass-through connections start to go bad, oh my God, it can be just sheer nightmare trying to find them. And usually the best thing is, my suggestion, if you have one of those solder connections are going bad, do yourself a favor. Every single one that you can see on the top side of the board, even if it looks, the component side, even if it looks good, resolder it. It just best practice. Add a little bit of liquid flux, reflow the solder, add a little bit of fresh solder, but yeah, because they're going to fail eventually. That's just the way it is. So let me flip this one over so you can actually see the underside. Like I say, this one has had nothing done to it. Make sure I get my flanges lined up there. So here's the underside of this one. Like I say, this one, let me get some additional light on here. This camera really loves its light. There, that's a little bit better. So yeah, as you can see, this one is PLL synthesized. And this is a variant of, this is kind of like if you're familiar with SBE and Johnson's radio, Johnson radios, like some of the Viking sideband radios, kind of similar. And there's other manufacturers that used them. Just this layout, the PLL's kind of it's on its own little circuit board. It's a module. This can here where there's some frequency adjustments down in here. Just the layout of the board, they're similar, but they are different. They are not the same. So, like I said, that's the problem. There's no service manual that I can find specifically on this one. So, yeah, you're really stuck. You just have to wing the whole thing when you work on it. But I've worked on enough of these, so usually a lot of times it's just a matter of figuring stuff out. But yeah, even then you can see there's parts bodged on. There's a ceramic trimmer capacitor bodged on that one. It's it's enough to drive a person nuts. Nice radios though. They work really well. Like I say, the only main downfall with these things are these double-sided circuit boards. And actually, like I say, they both use it. The 23 and the 40 channel. Let's see, a pointer here, so I can point one of them out for you. Am I in the camera view here? Right there is one. That little solder dot you see there. Matter of fact, there's another one right there. I'm just looking through the viewfinder. Yeah, but anywhere you see a dot of solder on the, like back here, there's one right there. There's one there. There's one there. And like I say, one of the big problems is occasionally you'll find one of those where you can't find it. That's the problem. You've got an intermittent connection, you tap on the board, or you're pushing on stuff, or you touch a solder connection on the bottom, and the connection's good on the bottom side, but when you touch it, the radio will either start working or the problem will happen. And what you'll find is that pass-through connector can be underneath of something like an electrolytic capacitor. It could be dead center in the underside underneath of an IF transformer or anything in these things. So it can be a just royal pain in the hoo-ha trying to diagnose them. It's a test of one's patience, I'll put it that way. So this one here is the 23 channel radio. So even looking at this side of the board, you can easily tell. I'll just really quick bring this one in. So if you look at this one, you can see how there's no parts here. It's got the big Pace logo with a board number, and you can just kind of look at it and see big shield here, one back there. And then you look at this board, yeah, you don't even need to see the components. You can just look at the solder side of the circuit board and see, yeah, it's completely different. this entire area is populated with parts. Yeah, it's night and day difference. There are a few bodge parts on the back of this. They're supposed to be their factory parts. Now, I have recapped this already, and you might look at this can capacitor and say, Mike, if you recapped it, that's the old original cap. It is. It's 3,300 microfarad. Trying to find a 3,300 microfarad capacitor that big around is hard nowadays. They used to be a lot bigger in diameter. And honestly, they didn't need to be. I gutted this one, so I've restuffed it, and you can actually see that from the underside. I just cut the bottom flange off, pull the old cap out. But the actual capacitor element inside this can was only like that big around. You know, it was like from the edge here to like maybe that big, like half. It filled like half the volume up. I think they only like back in the day had a couple can sizes, and they just used that can for all the large value caps. Didn't matter what it was, 33, 47, 60, 800, 10,000. They just used the same size cans for all of them. So, like I say, I just restuffed that. That way I can leave it mounted, because there's nowhere convenient to mount a modern capacitor that's smaller that won't fit in this clamp on the underside. So I just restuffed this one. That way I can just leave that as it is. Let me unplug the power here. Let's get her unhooked and flipped over. And now you can really see completely different radio. First big giveaway, no PLL synthesizer here, and we've got a row of crystals with the accompanying trimmer capacitors for all of them. And that's the one of the things that is completely different than the service manual. When they tell you to go to channel 1 and adjust C400 and something, trimmer capacitor, you try adjusting that in this radio with the radio on channel 1, yeah, it doesn't do anything because it's the wrong one. So apparently even the crystal socket or the circuit traces from the socket out to the trimmer capacitors is different in this compared to the version that's in these service manuals. And then, like I say, a lot of the other stuff in here, the layout, it looks very similar. Actually, here's the PACE manual. So, if you look, try and get this in camera view together. So yeah, if you look, you can see can, no problem. But when you get up to here, you immediately see a problem. This one offsets from here. The next one over is back. You look on here, it's one here. Well, there's one in front of and one behind. You come over a little bit, there's two directly touching each other right here. You look on the schematic, nah, they're separated and offset. There's three basically in a row here, one slightly jogged off. Well, if you look on here, they're not. There's two. There's one that's, there's an extra one in here. This also has an extra coil form, a tunable coil glued to the circuit board there. There's a trimmer capacitor here that's not in this one. It's just, and the alignment's completely different because of that. Receive circuit's the same way. Most of it's the same, receive, but the locations have shifted a little bit. So, you can use the factory service manual. It's just a matter of, you have to completely refigure, actually in my SAM's manual, what I'll usually do, and this was common for manufacturers back in the day, honestly, they would have several different versions of a radio. Instead of having to make a new model number, they just respin the radio model they already have, use the same faceplate, make the modifications to it, but they'd never publish anything, which is a nightmare for radio techs. So, most of my SAM's manuals, you open those up, they're just filled with post-it notes or stuff written in the columns, and I just kind of made up my own little diagram here for when you're on which channel to adjust, and I kind of drew my own little diagram here. But you gotta wing it. So, like I say, there's the underside, nice clean radio, and it's a good working radio now. Oh, and there's the electrolytic capacitor I restuffed. Like I say, basically just cut the bottom of the can off. The original one was mounted. The original capacitor element, which if you've ever taken one apart, it's just two sheets of aluminum foil basically separated by a oil impregnated piece of paper that has the dielectric material, oil or fluid impregnated into it, and that's just potted in wax. I basically did the same thing here, or hot glue. Where they used wax, I used hot glue. So just cut the bottom of the can off, was able to just grab that blob of wax in there once I got the capacitor element out, just kind of twist with a pair of pliers, and I've just pulled the blob of wax out all in one fell swoop. Plop the new one down in there, put some hot glue in around the perimeter of it. That capacitor's in there. It's, I can pick up the radio from the underside by the terminals of that. It's not going anywhere. So good and solid. It's been replaced though. So there you go. Let me get we'll show this once it's put back together. So actually like I said, I need to do the final cleanup on this, final cleaning of the inside, need to lubricate the clock, the gear assemblies on the clock here. And if you ever do want to service your clocks, just be careful. You don't ever want to get oil. Now this one's not too bad because this is a flip clock, okay? Because it's got the little number flaps, as you noticed when the time was changing. It's one of the early ones. It's a flip clock. But the later versions that had the 3 number wheels, if you lubricate those, do not lubricate the wheel that the number's on. Trust me, if you put a dot of oil on that little wheel on its pivot point for the shaft that goes through it, over time that oil migrates out to the edge of that wheel and it'll get out on the numbers and it looks like hell because then dust sticks to it. Yeah, the only thing I ever really lubricate are the mechanical parts. So, this is an alarm clock function. So, you turn this knob, you can see that flips up and off this micro switch here. I'll lubricate little junction points like that, apply a little bit of lubricant to the gears down here that you turn to adjust the time. Put a drop on the motor output shaft and right where it goes into the motor to lubricate the bushing that's in there. But yeah, don't go hog wild. Don't go getting out a spray can and spraying the things. Use a needle oiler. Something very fine tip where you're just applying a tiny bit at a time. It's just like, think of it as a pocket watch or, a mantle clock. You don't want to submerge the thing in oil. It's a very light coating, but that'll, help it operate a long, happy life or continue to work for a long time. So yeah, let me finish cleaning this up. I got to take all the knobs off, drop them in the ultrasonic cleaner and clean them, clean the faceplate. Covers are in really good shape actually on both of these radios. I probably won't do a separate video on the 40 channel. You saw the inside. It's, like I say, they're basically, the outsides are the same. It's just the insides are different, and I've already shown the differences. So yeah, not really a need to. I'll probably just make this like a dual video. I'll put in the title like 23 and 40 channel versions. But so there you go. There's like let me get the covers back on. We'll be back, and you can see what it looks like with its skin on. Okay, so I've got the 23 channel radio done now. Like I say, there's 2 different radios. This one's completed. Like I say, luckily this one, there's actually a service manual for this one. Somewhat, as I showed you, yeah, it doesn't exactly match the service manual, but it's close enough to where it's not a true pain in the butt to align. It's not like aligning a radio with no service manual. That just takes, especially on a sideband radio, that takes a lot of time. The biggest problem, especially with the way these radios are designed, especially with the RF final section in these, the way they do their frequency mixing. Yeah, guys, still on. The biggest problem is when you do the transmit alignment for the RF amplifier circuitry, there's actually 3 sets of adjustments. I'm not talking about like the meter and whatnot. What I mean is you adjust the lower sideband, basically when you're peaking the circuits. So you peak the lower sideband circuit because it has a separate circuit. Then you peak the upper sideband circuit because most of the upper and lower sideband circuits are operating at completely different frequency ranges. Like I say, these are really weird. There are a few radios like that have separate lower and upper sideband RF chains and it's just the way, once you get to a certain point, they make the frequencies are then, except for the offset, they'll basically join back together for the actual RF amplifier section, the final section, but the beginning stages, the mixer stages, yeah, they're way different frequencies, just really weird. So trying to figure those out, radios like this out, with no service manual, is a royal pain in the butt. And like I say, some of those coils, variable capacitors, were either present, they're missing, there's parts in this one that might not have been in the other one that was in the service manual, but at least looking at the service manual gives you a really good general idea of where those parts should be that you're looking for, where those adjustments are. And in most cases, if you ever run into that in a radio like this, usually when they make a modification, the part number range will still be the same. Parts may be missing or added, but those part numbers will still be in the range as the previous version of the radio. So in a radio like this, let's just, for an example, let's say in the earlier version radio, there might have been a tunable transformer for like a T301, T302, 303, and 304. Well, when you look in a radio like this one, you might see T301, T302, 303, but then T304 is missing. And there might be somewhere else on the board, you'll see a C301, which is a variable capacitor. They've just redesigned the circuit slightly, removed the tunable transformer, and possibly installed a variable capacitor, or they've completely eliminated it. But since the part numbers are still in the same range, you can still get a pretty good feel at where exactly you should be looking when you're doing the alignment. So yeah, it's just welcome to the world of old radios. There's not always a manual. You're going to run into that. So this one cleaned up really nice. The top cover is, as you can see, is in really, really nice condition. There is a little bit of markings on this front trim here. The side panels, because this does have some rather large... I think here, no matter which way I swing this, you can't see the side of the radio. Has some rather large bars. Yeah, it's a little bit, and these are plastic, and they're attached to the top cover, and then the bottom, this piece is attached to the bottom cover here, and it actually passes into, because this is actually, like I say, a fairly thin piece of plastic, but this actually passes through into the end caps here. And one thing that tells you, I don't even need to look up an old magazine to see approximately how much this thing cost back when it was made. I can just tell you it was expensive. How many radios do you see that have wood grain on the bottom? I'm not sure if I mentioned that before. Yeah, that's something you just don't see. Nobody ever looks at the bottom cover. Why would you put wood grain on it? You pay enough, they'll do stuff like that. So, yeah, that right there should tell you that, yeah, I'm sure this thing had a pretty penny. I'd almost be interested to go find an old advertisement for one of these and see how much the old Pace SideTalk 1000Bs cost, because, yeah, I'm sure it was expensive. But, yeah, they look really nice. They have nice big chrome knobs with aluminum discs inserts. And they cleaned up really nice. The knobs are actually in mint condition. They were a little dirty and nasty. They had a bunch of grunge on them. Dropped them in the ultrasonic cleaner, and yeah, you can see they're back to a mirror finish now. It's really nice condition. Clock worked great. It works. Tested the alarm function. That also works on the alarm. And if you use the alarm function, one thing you have to remember, anybody, if you ever use these radios that have these mechanical clocks, to use the alarm function, you have to leave the power switch turned on. So what you would do is you set your time for starters, whatever time it is, and then you would set. Actually, we won't set that yet. What we'll do is we'll turn the timer on. So see, if I turn that top knob, if you remember, there's that little metal flipper, for lack of better terms, inside on the top of the clock. That comes in contact with a micro switch. That micro switch is attached to the power supply, so you need to leave the radio turned on down here. You put it into the timer mode, that disconnects it, so the radio's turned off, and then we'll rotate this knob to simulate, the time, and you can see once it gets to the alarm time, when the time's the same, it flips the radio on. And if you keep going on this style clock, alarm clock radio, once you get to a certain point, it'll turn back off again. So it only the radio only stays on for a certain amount of time. So, you know, there it clicked on, 7:44, it clicked on around 7:45 there. And, yeah, so it looks like 6, maybe, it's kind of hard to tell, the numbers are so close together on that wheel, but, yeah, probably like 6:15 it shuts off, so, you know, it's on for a while, but that way if you're not home, you forgot to turn this thing off, it's not like your radio's the alarm's going to trip, and it's just going to stay on until you come home and find it. It'll come on, and then an hour and something later, it'll shut back off, because that was kind of good on the engineers, whoever designed that. And then when you want to actually use your radio, if you're not using the clock, you would have this on in the on position. You rotate the knob around to where it says on. It's kind of hard to see there, but there is a little tiny on printed on the faceplate right there. You rotate that to on. Now the clock alarm function is turned off, but again, you can see now you can actually turn the radio on, because now the power switch is what's controlling, and that's basically all that switch does. It either lets the power switch control the radio, turning it on and off, or it allows, when you rotate it, it allows the clock to control the radio to be turned on and off. It's just the one thing you have to remember is if you want to use the alarm, the power switch has to be on, because you can see if I turn it off and the alarm is turned on, so here, we'll simulate. Power's turned on, I've got to turn to the alarm clock mode, we'll rotate this around, and you can see the radio kicked on. So we'll do that again, but we'll turn this switch off. And if we rotate back around to the alarm time, you heard the click, but the radio didn't turn on. That's because we had this power switch turned off. So that's the one thing you have to remember. If you do actually want to use the alarm function, power switch has to be turned on. So there you go. There's a really nice looking condition restored Pace SideTalk 1000B. One thing I did do was all of the screws on the top cover were slightly rusty. They're the kind of wide oval head screws. They're P1 Phillips, kind of odd. I mean, a lot of radios used them back then, but compared to other radios, they use a P2 head. These use a P1. Luckily, since the bottom cover has the wood grain cover also, it has the same exact screws, and the bottom cover has the same amount of screws that the top cover has. So there's 2 on the top and 2 in each side, and there's 6 screws in the bottom cover. All the top and the side screws had a little bit of rust on them. Every single screw on the bottom side looked like the day it was made. So when I reassembled the radio, I just put the ones that had a little bit of rust on them on the bottom side, cleaned them up, but stuck them on the bottom side, and then I used the screws that looked like brand new and put those on the top. So yeah, it looks really nice. So there you go. There's a Pace SideTalk 1000B.